It was supposed to be a fresh start, a chance to put my life back together. My name's Jack, and like a lot of people in my position, I found myself looking for work after I was let go from my old job. The company I had worked for shut down, and suddenly I was staring down the barrel of unemployment and bills I couldn't pay. My luck was running out, and that's when I found the ad. It was a strange one: night guard at Rockwood Prison. Must be able to handle isolation. Pay $2,000 week. Apply now. I should have been skeptical, but desperation makes you do strange things. I clicked on the ad. The job was in a remote location, deep in the mountains, far from the nearest town. A prison that had been abandoned for years, left to decay in the wilderness, surrounded by towering trees and fog that clung to the ground like a blanket. At first glance, it seemed like a perfect opportunity. The pay was great, and I could get away from everything. Maybe the isolation would help me clear my head, sort out my life, figure out what came next. I had no idea what I was walking into. The warden, a man named Arthur Kane, was the first person I met when I arrived. He was older than I expected, his face tired and weathered, as though the prison had aged him faster than time had. We shook hands in the cramped lobby, and he gave me a brief rundown of the prison's history. Rockwood Prison, he said with a sigh, was built in the 1800s. It housed some of the most dangerous criminals of its time. But things changed here. People started disappearing. Caretakers, guards, inmates, they all vanished, he said. It so nonchalantly, like it was something that happened every day. I thought it was just crazy talk, part of the legend of the place, but I listened. He told me that the prison had been closed for over 2 decades, but the local authorities kept it maintained. The job I was applying for was overnight security, making sure nothing disturbed the place, keeping it safe for whoever might eventually want to buy it. There were rules to follow, strict rules. He handed me a binder with the prison's guidelines and instructed me to read them carefully. I skimmed through them, but one line stuck out above the rest. Do not enter the basement. Do not go near the east wing after midnight. He paused after handing it to me, looking at me with serious eyes, as if he were waiting for me to question it. You're going to hear things, you're going to feel things, but trust the rules, they'll keep you safe. His words were thick, with meaning. I figured it was all part of the territory's spooky stories, maybe to add to the atmosphere. I nodded, not wanting to sound skeptical, but the way he said it made me uneasy. I had to remind myself why I was here. The $2,000 a week was more money than I had ever made, and it would be enough to get me back on track. I could manage the isolation. Hell, I had been isolated most of my lifelong hours of waiting in dead-end jobs, with nothing but the sound of my own thoughts. What could a little more isolation hurt? The first night came quickly. It was foggy when I made my way through the tall iron gates and into the prison yard. The wind howled, and the old stone walls loomed over me like an ancient fortress. The prison sat on a hilltop, surrounded by a dense forest, its dark silhouette standing out against the night sky. As I walked through the front doors, I could hear the creaks and groans of the building settling. The air inside was thick and musty, the smell of old stone and decay. The lobby had been abandoned for years, with dust collecting on everything, but it still held a sense of presence. I don't know how to explain it, but the moment I walked in, it felt like the building was watching me. Arthur Kane showed me to the small guard station on the 2nd floor, a tiny office with a single desk and a chair. There were monitors that displayed cameras throughout the prison, a faint hum from the old equipment filling the air. The station felt like a prison within a prison. I sat down, plugged in the lights, and checked the cameras. It was quiet, too quiet. For the first few hours, nothing happened. The eerie silence was interrupted only by the occasional scratching or tapping sound from the distant halls. I dismissed it. The building was old, creaky. I wasn't going to let myself get scared over nothing. But around midnight, things started to change. I noticed a strange flickering on one of the monitors. The East Wing, the one place Arthur told me to avoid, suddenly showed up on the feed. At first it looked empty, just long, dark hallways, stretching into nothingness. But then I saw something move, a shadow. I froze, staring at the screen. The shadow shifted across the hall, too quick to make out. I leaned closer to the monitor, my breath catching in my throat. The camera feed began to flicker, and for a moment, I could swear I saw a figure standing in the hallway, just standing there, staring at the camera. I grabbed the flashlight from the desk and rushed out of the room. I didn't sleep much after that first night. The strange shadows in the East Wing, the whispering voices that seemed to follow me, the cold fingers I felt brushing against my neck, it all felt like a bad dream. I kept telling myself it wasn't real, but deep down I knew something wasn't right. I had been warned about the rules: don't go near the East Wing after midnight, never enter the basement, and never look into the mirrors. But those rules were starting to feel like warnings, not just guidelines. The prison wasn't just haunted, it felt alive, watching me, waiting for me to make a mistake. The next night was my first real shift alone. The warden had left early, leaving me with nothing but the old, creaky building and the long, silent corridors. I went over the rules again: stay in the guard station, monitor the cameras, and don't break the rules. The night was calm at first, just like the previous one. The wind outside howled, but inside, the prison was still, like a tomb. It was quiet, too quiet. I couldn't shake the feeling that I wasn't alone. The longer I sat there in the guard station, the more I felt like the walls were closing in around me. Every sound, every creak of the floorboards, every whisper in the distance sent my heart racing. I kept checking the cameras, nothing out of the ordinary, but something in my gut told me that I wasn't alone. Around midnight, the air in the room seemed to shift. It grew colder, almost icy. I glanced up at the monitor, and my heart stopped. The East Wing was lit up. The dim light flickered on the screen, casting shadows along the walls. I froze. It was the same shadow I'd seen the night before, the figure standing just at the edge of the camera's view. But this time, it wasn't a trick of the light. This time, it was real. The figure was there, waiting. I could see it more clearly. Now, the silhouette was tall, its features indistinct, like a figure made of shadow and mist. I grabbed the flashlight, my fingers trembling as I reached for the door. My body moved without thinking. I knew I should stay put, follow the rules, but something inside me pushed me forward, urging me to go check the East Wing again. I had to see it. The hallway was darker than I remembered, and the air was thick with the smell of old stone and dampness. I could hear footsteps echoing in the distance, but when I looked, there was no one there. The whispering started again, only this time, it wasn't coming from the walls, it was coming from the shadows, soft voices that seemed to call my name. Reached the East Wing door, and my hand hovered over the handle. I shouldn't have been here. I knew the rules, but something was drawing me in. I pushed the door open, and the air inside felt freezing, like a gust of wind had blown through the room. Even though all the windows were sealed shut, the figure was there again, just as I had seen it on the camera. But this time, it was closer. Closer than I had ever expected. I could see it more clearly now. The figure was tall, wearing something that looked like an old prison uniform, but the fabric seemed to shift, like smoke. Its face was blurry, its features indistinct, and yet I could feel its eyes on me, burning into me. I stepped back, heart racing, but the figure didn't move. It stood there, watching me, waiting. The whispers grew louder, and I swore I could hear my name among them. I turned to run, but something stopped me. A force I couldn't explain seemed to grip my body, holding me in place, and then, just like that, the figure was gone. Vanished into the air like it was never there. The whispers stopped. The east wing was once again silent. My breath came in. Short, ragged gasps. I stumbled back to the guard station, my mind racing. What had just happened? Was I losing my mind, or was the prison really haunted? I checked the cameras again, but the east wing was empty. No shadows, no figures, nothing. But I knew what I had seen. I knew what I had felt. The lodge was alive, watching me, waiting for me to break the rules. And now I had. I didn't know what I had unleashed, but I knew one thing for sure. I couldn't stay here, not after what I'd seen, not after what I felt. But there was no way out. I was trapped, caught between the rules and whatever dark force had claimed this place. The clock on the wall ticked, the minutes dragging by as I sat in the guard station, the cold air creeping into the room. I could still feel the presence, the shadows, the whispers. They weren't gone, they were waiting. And as the clock struck 2 in the morning, the air grew colder. The lights flickered, and I saw it again, the figure. It was back. This time, I didn't make the mistake of following it. I stayed put, following the rules as best as I could, hoping it would leave me alone. But deep down, I knew the truth. The rules wouldn't save me. The prison wasn't going to let me go. I had already broken the most important rule, and there was no turning back. And I knew that no matter how hard I tried, the lodge would claim me, just as it had claimed those before me. The next few nights blurred together, each one heavier than the last. The whispers grew more frequent. The shadows seemed to follow me wherever I went. And the figure in the east wing was no longer a fleeting sight in the cameras. It was real, and it was waiting for me. I had already broken the rule about the east wing, and now I was starting to feel the weight of it. I tried to push through, hoping the eerie occurrences would fade, that they were just a result of stress, but deep down, I knew better. The prison was far from empty. It was alive, and the whispers were its voice, the shadows its eyes. And worst of all, the rules that the warden had set for me, they weren't just to keep me safe. They were to keep me alive. That night, something changed. I was sitting at the guard station, scrolling through the security footage, when I noticed something strange on one of the cameras. The reflection in the hallway mirror, it wasn't just a reflection. There was something standing there, just out of sight, obscured by shadows. It was a tall figure, wearing something that looked like a prison uniform, the same one I had seen before. My breath caught in my throat, but this time, it wasn't like the first encounter. This time, I knew the rules. Don't look in the mirror. I couldn't stop myself. I had to look. The urge to understand what was happening was overwhelming. The figure stood there, in front of the mirror, silent and still. I grabbed my flashlight and rushed down the hallway, my heart pounding in my chest. The air felt thick, like something was pressing down on me, suffocating me. My footsteps echoed, the sound of them too loud, too sharp in the stillness of the prison. I reached the mirror, and there it was, again the figure. But this time, it was different. The reflection was distorted, like it was trying to break through the glass, trying to reach me. I could see its face now. It wasn't human, not in any way I could understand. The eyes were wide and hollow, like black pits, and the face was frozen, a ghastly grin stretched across its features. I wanted to turn away, to scream, but I couldn't. I was frozen, and then it moved. Not in the reflection, but in front of me. I stumbled backward, my flashlight flickering as I turned, but the figure was gone. I stood there in the dark, my heart racing. What was it? Who was it? It had been standing right in front of me, not just in the mirror, but in real life. My hands shook as I wiped the sweat from my palms. I had broken the rule. The mirror was meant to protect me, but I had ignored it. And now the prison was coming for me. I walked back to the guard station, trying to steady my breath. The lights flickered above me, and I glanced nervously at the hallway. Every part of me screamed to leave, but I couldn't. The warden's words echoed in my mind. The rules keep you safe. But they weren't enough. Not anymore. The prison had me in its grasp, and I knew it wasn't just haunted. It was something far worse. I tried to go back to work, to pretend like everything was fine. But the more I sat there, the more I felt like the walls were closing in on me. The lights above my head flickered once more, and I glanced up at the monitor. There it was, again, the East Wing camera. This time, I could see the figure standing in front of the cell doors. It was tall, but there was something different about it. It wasn't the same figure I had seen before. No, this one had changed. It had grown, its body now towering over the hallway, and its eyes, those deep, empty pits, were staring straight into the camera, into me. I could hear it now, the whispering. It wasn't coming from the walls this time. It was coming from the monitor. Look in the mirror. The voice was so soft, almost a breeze, but it sent a chill straight down my spine. I couldn't stop myself. I had to look. The voice was compelling, calling me like a siren song. I stumbled out of the guard station, my heart in my throat. The hallway stretched before me, the shadows thicker now, more alive than before. I reached the East Wing, and the air felt like ice. It was waiting for me. I stood before the mirror again. The figure was there, its face twisted, its grin stretching wider, but this time I couldn't look away. I felt my body drawn to it, as though it had control over me. I stepped closer, closer still, until my face was right up against the glass. I could see every detail, the hollow eyes, the wide grin. But then, something shifted. It wasn't just a reflection anymore. The figure stepped forward, its hands pressing against the glass. I reached out instinctively, but before I could touch it, the glass cracked. The mirror shattered. I stumbled back, my breath ragged as the room went silent. But it wasn't over. The cracks in the mirror seemed to move, growing, as if the glass was alive. And then, from the cracks, I heard it. A voice, soft at first, then louder, sharper. You broke the rule. The glass shifted, and I felt something cold crawl over my skin. The figure stepped out of the mirror, its body shifting like smoke, its form growing larger, more twisted. Its eyes burned with anger, and I could feel the heat of its gaze as it moved toward me. I wanted to scream, to run, but I couldn't. I was paralyzed. Just before the figure reached me, the lights went out. The world went black, and I felt the coldness overwhelm me. When I woke up, I was back in the guard station. The clock was ticking. The monitors were back on, but everything felt wrong. The mirror, the whispers, the figure, they were still there, lurking just beyond my reach. And I knew, deep down, that I hadn't escaped the prison's grip. The rules were I woke up the next morning with the feeling that I had just barely escaped something. The whispers, the figure in the mirror, the sudden coldness that had taken over my body, they felt like they were still with me, lingering in the air. I tried to shake it off, to convince myself it was all in my head, but deep down, I knew the truth. This prison was not just haunted, it was something worse. It was alive, and whatever it was, it wanted me to stay. The days that followed were quiet to quiet. The noises stopped, but the feeling of being watched never left. I followed the rules, just like I was supposed to. I stayed away from the East Wing, kept to the guard station, and avoided looking in any more mirrors. But the unease never left. Then, on the fourth night, I came across something I wasn't supposed to see. It started with a knackersoft, rhythmic knock coming from the storage room. The kind of sound that seems harmless at first, like an old pipe or a loose floorboard. But it kept going. Tap, 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 over and over. At first I ignored it, trying to focus on the cameras, but something kept pulling me toward that sound. The storage room, the door to the storage room was always locked. A part of the prison I'd been told to stay away from. But that night, something was different. The door was cracked open, just a sliver, and the knocking was louder now, almost insistent. I stood frozen for a moment, my breath caught in my throat. I had already broken the rules I'd been warned, but I couldn't help myself. I had to see what was in there. I grabbed the flashlight from the desk, my hands trembling, and pushed the door open slowly. The air inside the room was thick with the scent of dust, mildew, and something stale. The light from my flashlight flickered against the walls, revealing old crates, abandoned equipment, and cobwebs. The knocking stopped. I stepped inside, the floor creaking beneath me. The room was smaller than I had imagined, with low ceilings and a musty, suffocating air. The boxes were stacked haphazardly along the walls, some with old markings I couldn't make out. But what caught my eye was the corner part of the room that seemed darker, almost as if it were being swallowed by the shadows. As I moved toward it, my flashlight flickered again, casting long, shifting shadows on the walls. And then I saw it, a small desk hold, covered in dust, but strangely intact. Next to the desk was an old wooden chest, its surface scratched and worn. The desk itself had papers scattered across it, and the chest had something strange about it, a symbol carved into its surface, one I'd seen before. It was the same symbol that had appeared in the diaries and the journal I had found earlier. I reached for the papers, flipping through them quickly, trying to make sense of the scribbled notes. Some were written in a language I didn't understand, while others were just frantic ramblings. But one thing stood out. They never leave. They are part of the prison. We are all part of it. I stopped reading. My hands were shaking as I looked over the worn pages. The ink faded and smeared. The message was clear. Whoever had written this, they were trapped. Trapped just like me. I turned back to the chest. The symbol on the surface seemed to call to me, a warning that I couldn't ignore. I reached out and brushed my fingers over it, feeling the carved edges beneath my touch. The moment I did, I heard it again, the whisper, low and urgent. Don't open it. I froze. My heartbeat quickened, but I had already broken the rules. What was one more? I bent down and grabbed the lid of the chest. The sound of scraping wood filled the room as I pulled it open. Inside, there was nothing but darkness. I couldn't see anything, just an empty void. But then, a faint glow emerged from the bottom of the chest. It was soft at first, like a pulse, a rhythm that matched the thumping of my own heart. I leaned closer, drawn to it, and that's when I saw it. The reflection dot at the bottom of the chest was a mirror, framed in brass, cracked and aged. But the reflection I saw wasn't mine. It was a shadowy figure, standing in the corner of the room, just like the one I'd seen before. It was watching me. I slammed the chest shut, stumbling back in horror. The whispering started again, this time louder, more frantic. You shouldn't have opened it. I ran out of the room, my breath coming in short gasps. I knew I was in over my head, but I couldn't stop. The air was suffocating. The shadows seemed to press against me from every angle. I ran back to the guard station, my heart pounding in my chest. I checked the monitors, but the east wing was still empty. No shadowy figure, no signs of movement, but the feeling of being watched was stronger now, like something unseen was just waiting for me to slip up again. I had opened the chest. I had ignored the warnings, and now the prison was going to make me pay. I sat back in the chair, my head spinning. I wanted to leave. I wanted to run far away from this place, but there was nowhere to go. I was trapped here, in this haunted prison, with no way out. The rules that had been set to keep me safe didn't matter anymore. I had broken them, and now I was part of it, part of the prison. The days were beginning to blur together, each night passing in a haze of fear and dread. I couldn't shake the feeling that the prison was watching me, waiting for me to make another mistake. I'd already broken the first rule, the most important one. When I ventured into the east wing, I couldn't stop thinking about the figure I had seen, and the mirror, the way it seemed to call to me, pulling me deeper into its reflection. Like a doorway to another world, but the most terrifying thing of all, the prison wasn't just haunted, it was alive. And the longer I stayed, the more I realized that I had become part of its curse. I could feel it in my bones, in the air around me. The rules that had been put in place to keep me safe were no longer enough. The prison had its hooks in me now, and no matter how hard I tried to escape, it was always one step ahead. That night, as I patrolled the darkened halls, I came across something I hadn't seen before: the door to the locked room. It was a small, unassuming door near the back of the prison, one I had passed a dozen times before without giving it a second thought. The key for it was kept in the office, a part of the regular duties to make sure nothing went amiss. But tonight, for the first time, I was compelled to open it. I couldn't explain why, but something about that door, the way it loomed in the hallway, seemed to call to me. I grabbed the key from my pocket and inserted it into the lock. The door creaked open slowly, revealing a darkened room beyond. A gust of cold air hit me, and I shivered as I stepped inside. The room was filled with old crates, boxes, and what looked like forgotten memories, papers, photographs, and old prison records scattered across the floor. It was a small room, cramped, with little to no ventilation, but something about it felt wrong. I hesitated for a moment, wondering if I should turn back, but the curiosity gnawed at me. I had to know what was in here. I had to find out why this room was locked, why no one ever spoke about it. As I stepped further inside, The air grew colder, and the sense of unease grew with it. The room wasn't just a storage space, it was a tomb. The atmosphere was thick with dust and stale air, as though it had been sealed off for years. But there was something else, something I couldn't quite place. A tension in the air, like the room itself was holding its breath. The walls were covered in strange symbols, etched into the stone with what looked like old scratches or carvings. Some of the symbols I recognized from the journals, the same runes that were said to be part of the prison's dark rituals. My heart skipped a beat. I had read about these symbols before in the old Caretakers journal, and it had always been a warning. The prison was alive, and the symbols were a way to control it, to keep it from consuming those who stayed too long. As I walked further into the room, I noticed a large chest sitting in the corner, covered in dust. The chest was old, its edges worn down by time, and a strange symbol was carved into its surface, the same one from the journal. I couldn't stop myself. My hand reached for the chest, and as I touched it, the coldness that had been surrounding me intensified. It was as if the chest was drawing all the energy from the room into it. The darkness inside the room seemed to shift, like something was moving just out of sight. I knelt down and tried to lift the chest's lid, but it was stuck. My fingers gripped the edge, and with a small amount of force, the lid creaked open. The moment it did, a rush of cold air hit my face, and a wave of dread washed over me. I almost slammed the lid shut, but I stopped myself, staring into the chest dot inside. There was nothing but old papers, yellowed with age, and a few photographs of prisoners. But it wasn't the contents that scared me, it was the presence. The room felt different now, alive, and I could hear it, a soft whispering, as though the shadows themselves were trying to speak to me. The words were indistinct, but the meaning was clear. You shouldn't be here. My flashlight flickered. I spun around, but there was nothing. The room was empty, save for the chest and the eerie markings on the walls. But I could feel something pressing in on me, something close, watching me. I backed away from the chest, but my gaze fell on something I hadn't noticed before. A mirror standing against the wall, its surface cracked, covered in a layer of dust. I felt the pull, the same pull I had felt in the East Wing. The mirror was calling me. I didn't want to look. I knew the rules, I had already broken them too many times, but it was like the mirror was compelling me, forcing me to look. My feet moved against my will. The air was cold and the whispering grew louder, more urgent. Look in the mirror. The voices whispered. I approached the mirror, the reflection faint at first, but as I wiped away the dust, the image became clearer, and I froze. It wasn't me that I saw in the reflection, it was someone else, a man, tall and gaunt, with hollow eyes, staring back at me from the glass. It was like the mirror wasn't showing a reflection, it was showing something else, something that had been trapped in the glass for years. The man's mouth opened and his voice echoed through my mind. You are part of it now. You can't leave. I turned away, panic rising in my chest. I had to get out of this room. I had to leave. But as I turned toward the door, I saw it. The figure was standing in the doorway, blocking my exit. The man in the mirror had stepped out, his shadow stretching across the walls, dark and distorted. I was trapped. I couldn't shake the feeling that something in the prison was trying to claim me. The cold air, the whispers, the haunting figures, it was all beginning to feel inevitable. I had already broken the rules, and with each violation, the prison's grip on me tightened. I couldn't escape, couldn't leave. I had seen the shadowy figures in the mirror, heard the voices calling my name, and felt the watchful presence of something ancient, something far beyond my understanding. That night, I went back to the storage room, unable to resist the pull of the unanswered questions. The chest had been a revelation, but there was more to discover. The journal, the symbolic carvings, and the eerie whispers, they all pointed to one thing: the caretakers. I needed to know more about them. What happened to the others who had worked here? Why did they disappear? The journal had hinted at something darker, and I needed to understand the truth. I approached the old desk, the one I had found earlier, and began flipping through the papers again. This time, my fingers trembled as I turned the brittle pages, my mind racing. As I read, I found what I was looking for: a list of names, written hastily, almost in a panic. One of them was a name I'd seen before, Miller, the name from the journal. But this time, there was more. Each name had a corresponding date, and each one ended with a chilling note: missing, no trace. Last seen near the east wing. I felt my blood run cold. These weren't just caretakers, these were the missing guards, the people who had disappeared without a trace, just like the stories said. I flipped through more pages, and the entries became more frantic, more desperate. There were warnings, scribbled notes about strange occurrences in the east wing, about voices in the dark and shadows that moved on their own. But the last entry caught my eye. It was different. It was written in red ink, jagged and rushed. The east wing is cursed. They never leave. They become part of it. The prison owns them. It wants me next. Stay away. The rules keep you safe. I felt a coldness settle over me as I read those words. They become part of it. The prison doesn't just haunt people, it consumes them. And now I understood. The careful whispers, the cold fingers, and the shadowy figures weren't just ghosts. They were the prison's victims, trapped forever in its walls. But the worst part, I had been breaking the rules, and I was already a part of it. I closed the journal and backed away from the desk, my heart pounding in my chest. I knew what I had to do, but it was too late. I had already gone too far. The door to the storage room creaked open behind me, and I spun around, my flashlight catching on the empty space. The whispers began again, low and distant, but they weren't just in my head anymore. They were in the room with me. The walls themselves seemed to hum with a strange energy, as if the prison itself was alive, feeding on my fear. And then I saw it. A figure appeared in the doorway, tall, slender man, his face pale, his eyes hollow. He was wearing a prison uniform, just like the others in the journal. His eyes locked onto mine, and I froze. The whispering grew louder, but this time, it wasn't just a voice, it was a chorus. A dozen voices echoing in my ears. "You're one of us now." The figure took a step forward, his presence overpowering. I stumbled back, my breath shallow, my mind racing. I wanted to scream, to run, but I couldn't move. The figure stepped closer, and with each step, the shadows in the room seemed to grow deeper, darker, closer. I felt trapped, cornered. The prison had claimed me, just like it had claimed the others before me. I tried to speak, but my voice caught in my throat. The figure didn't say anything else, but I could hear him. I could hear him whispering my name. "You're one of us now. You'll never leave. This is your home. This is where you belong." I backed away, but my feet felt heavy, as if the floor itself was holding me in place. The figure stretched out his hand toward me, his fingers cold as ice. I couldn't take my eyes off him. I knew I should run, but I was paralyzed, unable to move. The walls seemed to close in around me, the shadows pulling tighter and tighter, and then the light flickered. The figure disappeared, leaving nothing but the darkness and the echo of his words. I stood there in stunned silence, my body trembling, my mind racing. What had just happened? I was still standing in the storage room, alone, but I wasn't alone. I could feel it. The prison was still there, watching me, waiting for me. I had already broken the rules, and now I was paying the price. The whispers grew louder, and for the first time, I realized the prison had never let me go. The rules had kept me safe for a while, but now they were useless. The prison had claimed me. I was one of them. The night after the figure in the storage room vanished, I couldn't sleep. The whispers haunted me, lingering in the corners of my mind like a terrible memory I couldn't escape. I kept telling myself it wasn't real, that it was all a product of my mind's stress, fatigue, maybe even just the loneliness of being trapped in such a place. But deep down, I knew the truth. I had crossed a line. The prison wasn't just haunted, it was alive, and now it was feeding on my fear. When I found it, I had spent hours trying to block out the memories of the figure, focusing on the security cameras to distract myself. But no matter how many times I looked at the monitors, the prison seemed still empty. Yet, I could feel it, a tangible presence that hung in the air, watching, waiting. Around 2 a.m., I decided I needed something to occupy my mind. I'd been rummaging through the office, trying to find anything to read, anything to keep me from going mad. And that's when I found it, a small, weathered diary buried beneath a stack of papers in a drawer. It was old, its leather cover cracked and worn, the pages yellowed with age. On the first page, the name was written in faded ink, Gideon Harker, a former caretaker. I opened it, expecting a dull record of the day-to-day life of someone who had worked here, maybe some forgotten piece of prison history. What I found was far worse. The entries were sporadic, each one filled with hastily written words. At first, they seemed harmless enough. A description of the day-to-day activities, locking up the prisoners, checking the gates, ensuring everything was in place. But as the entries went on, the tone began to change. There was fear in the words, panic. I don't know how much longer I can keep my mind together. The air here feels wrong. The walls are closing in. The whispers never stop. I turned the page. The next entry was dated a week later. I tried to leave last night. I can't explain it, but the moment I stepped outside, I felt something pulling me back. I saw something in the trees. It followed me, watching me, every step I took. It was there, waiting. I can feel it now. I felt a chill run down my spine as I continued reading. The entries grew more desperate with each passing day. Each one was filled with raving about the prison's grip, how it was taking over the caretakers, how they were all trapped. We are becoming part of it. I can feel the walls pushing in on me, my mind slipping. I see their faces, the ones who disappeared. They're here, in the shadows. They want me to join them. I can feel it in the air. Then, I found something that made my blood run cold. The East Wing is where it started. They say the prisoners there made a deal with something dark. When the prison was built, it wasn't just for punishment. It was a trap, a sacrifice. The ones who are brought here, they never leave. They become part of the walls. The words seemed to haunt me as I read them. The east wing, where I had seen the figure, where I had heard the whispers. The place I had been warned about. I shut the diary, but my hands were shaking. I had to know more. What had happened in the east wing? Why had the warden kept it locked? What had Gideon Harker been trying to tell me before he went mad? I stood up and glanced around the office. It felt colder now. The walls seemed to press in around me. I needed to find answers, but I didn't know if I was ready for what I would uncover. I walked over to the guard desk, staring at the monitor. The cameras had stopped showing anything from the east wing. It was completely blank, like the prison was hiding something. I needed to go there. I needed to find the truth. With trembling hands, I grabbed the flashlight, the keyring with the old keys, and made my way to the east wing. As I walked down the long corridor, the air grew heavier, the temperature dropping by the minute. The walls seemed to grow closer, as if they were closing in on me, pushing me toward the one place I knew I shouldn't go. The door to the east wing was locked. The key fit perfectly into the rusty lock, but as I turned the handle, I heard it a soft knock, like someone was standing behind the door, waiting for me. I hesitated, but the compulsion to find out what lay beyond that door was too strong to ignore. I pushed the door open, and the air that rushed out of the east wing was cold, thick with the scent of decay. The room was empty at least, at first glance, but there was something about it that made my skin crawl. The walls were covered in scratches and marks, as though someone had been trying to get out. The floor was shattered, bits of broken glass and debris scattered everywhere. But it wasn't the state of the room that caught my attention. It was the mirror on the wall. I had heard the stories. The mirror in the east wing was a part of the legend, the place where the spirits of the lost caretakers gathered, the place where they had all been trapped. But there it was, hanging on the wall like a doorway into another world. Its glass was cracked, the surface fogged with something dark. I knew better than to look, but I couldn't resist. As I stepped closer, my flashlight flickered. The air in the room grew even colder, and I could see my breath clouding in front of me. And then I saw it dot, a figure standing behind me in the mirror, just like the ones in the journals. Just like the man I had seen before. It was him, Gideon Harker. His hollow eyes were locked onto mine, and he smiled. But it wasn't a comforting smile. It was a sinister grin, one that sent a jolt of fear through my entire body. His reflection was blurry, distorted, but his voice was clear. "You shouldn't have come here. You're already part of it. There's no escaping it now." The mirror shattered. The shattered mirror lay on the floor, the jagged pieces reflecting the darkness that surrounded me. I stumbled back, my breath shallow, my heart hammering in my chest. The reflection of Gideon Harker still burned into my mind, his hollow eyes following me, his words echoing in my ears. "You're already part of it," he had said. And I didn't know whether he meant the prison itself, the curse, or something far worse. But what I did know was that I couldn't escape. I couldn't leave. The prison had already claimed me, just like it had claimed the others before me. I turned away from the broken mirror, but the coldness of the room seemed to follow me. It was as if the walls themselves were closing in, growing tighter, suffocating me. I tried to steady myself, to take control of my own thoughts, but it felt impossible. The shadows seemed to move now, watching me, whispering, crawling along the edges of my mind. I couldn't trust what was real anymore. I ran back down the hall, the footsteps behind me sounding too loud, too close. Every turn I made seemed to lead me deeper into the prison, deeper into its grip. I knew I should head back to the guard station, lock the doors, and stay inside. But I couldn't shake the feeling that the prison itself was guiding me down a path I wasn't supposed to follow. I reached the entrance, but it wasn't just the door I saw. It was the storm raging, furious, violent. The wind howled through the trees, and the branches scraped against the windows like claws. Rain battered the glass, making the outside world look like a blur of darkness. The once silent prison now felt like it was alive, pulsing with energy. The storm outside seemed to match the chaos inside, as if the two were linked, connected by something far older than I could comprehend. I thought I saw a figure standing in the rain outside the gates, watching, but it was gone before I could blink. My body tensed, and I couldn't breathe. Something was out there, and it was waiting for me. I turned back to the halls, my heart racing, and that's when I heard the creaking of the walls. The faint sound of scratching, followed by the unmistakable sound of footsteps echoing down the hallway. I tried to tell myself it was just my imagination, the wind playing tricks on me, but I knew it wasn't. The prison had started to move. The walls were alive, shifting, responding to the storm outside. I felt the air change, thickening, as though the entire building was holding its breath, waiting for something to happen. The lights flickered, and the air grew colder still. I looked at the monitors in a panic. The cameras were glitching, distorted by the power surges. Static crackled through the speakers. But then, I saw the East Wing was alive again. The camera showed movement. Shadows darted across the screen, too quick to make out. And there, in the flickering light of the monitor, was the figure once more, standing at the far end of the hall, staring at me through the camera. I froze. My hand hovered over the camera controls, but I couldn't look. Away, the figure moved closer, the shadows becoming more defined. It was the same figure from the mirror, Gideon Harker, but it wasn't just him anymore. The figure seemed to shift, the shadows melding into other forms, the forms of other caretakers. Their faces were distorted, twisted in agony, and their eyes empty, hollow. They were all standing there, watching me, waiting. I tried to shut the cameras off, but they wouldn't turn off. The whispers came back, louder this time. "You're one of us now." The temperature dropped sharply, and the sound of scratching became louder, closer. The walls were shaking now. The prison was shifting, responding to the spirits within. The floorboards creaked, and I could hear the old doors slamming open and shut by themselves. The prison was becoming a living entity, and I don't know how much time passed. I can't remember when the walls stopped shaking, when the whispers finally faded into silence. All I know is that when I woke up, I was no longer in the guard station. The prison had swallowed me whole, and now I was deep inside its gut, trapped in its maze of darkness. I tried to move, but my limbs felt like they were weighted down with stone, like the very air was holding me in place. The walls were still alive, pulsing with an unnatural energy. The ground beneath me shifted, as though the prison itself was breathing. The air was thick with the scent of decay, and I felt a chill settle deep in my bones. I had made a mistake. I had broken the rules, and now the prison was closing in on me, ready to take me. I could hear them, the whispers, soft at first, but growing louder with each passing moment. The voices were everywhere, swirling around me, calling my name. "You're one of us now." I stumbled to my feet, my flashlight flickering in my hand. I didn't know where I was or how I got here, but the feeling of being watched was stronger than ever. The shadows were everywhere. They moved like living things, crawling along the walls, the floor, the ceiling. There was no escape. The prison was alive, and it was hungry. It wanted me to stay, to become part of it. I had to get out. I began to walk, stumbling through the maze of corridors, my heart pounding in my chest. The prison felt different now, like it was alive in ways I couldn't understand. The walls shifted, the floors creaked, and I could hear footsteps echoing around me, footsteps that weren't mine. The whispers became clearer, more urgent. Join us, join us. I didn't know how much longer I could hold onto my sanity. I had to get out. I had to break free before the prison consumed me completely. But the more I walked, the further the exits seemed to drift away. The prison was closing in around me. The walls felt like they were pressing against me, tightening like a noose. And the figure from the mirror, from the east wing, it was there again, standing just out of sight in the shadows, watching me. It wasn't just the ghost of Gideon Harker anymore. The entire prison had taken on a form of its own. Its walls, its corridors, its very foundations seemed to pulse with life, as if it was a creature that was feeding on me, drawing me in. It wasn't a prison anymore. It was a living entity, and I had become its prey. I turned a corner, my breath ragged, and there it was, the east wing. The door loomed in front of me, the entrance that had been closed off since my first night. The rules had always told me to stay out of the east wing, to never go near it after midnight, but now it was the only way forward. I had to face whatever was in there, whatever had been haunting this place. I reached for the door handle, but as my hand touched it, the temperature dropped. It felt like the air was freezing, and I could see my breath misting in front of me. The door creaked open slowly, and I stepped inside. The east wing was a graveyard, place of death and decay. The walls were covered in thick layers of dust, the floors creaking under my weight. But it wasn't the dust or the silence that made my skin crawl, it was the presence in the room. I could feel them all around me. The caretakers, the ones who had vanished. Their faces were imprinted in the walls, their souls trapped here. They were watching me, waiting for me to join them, join us. I heard the whispers again, louder this time. They were no longer in the walls, they were in my head, screaming at me, pushing me forward, urging me to break the last rule: never look in the mirror. I turned, my flashlight trembling in my hand, and there it was, the mirror. It stood at the far end of the room, an old, cracked reflection, its surface darkened with age. It was the same mirror that had haunted me since my first night. But this time, the reflection wasn't just a shadow. It was alive. The figure was there, Gideon Harker, standing in the reflection, his eyes burning, his smile wide and twisted. I stepped closer, my heart pounding in my chest. The whispers grew louder, now a cacophony of voices, all calling me. Look at us. I couldn't resist. My hand reached out, trembling as I wiped away the grime from the mirror's surface. The reflection became clearer, more defined. But as I stared into it, I saw something worse than just the figure. I saw myself. My face was twisted, contorted in a grotesque grin. My eyes were hollow, empty, just like theirs. And I understood in that moment, I had become one of them. The prison had claimed me, just as it had claimed all the others before me. I was no longer a guard. I was part of the prison's dark history. Welcome home, the figure in the mirror whispered, its voice filled with malice. You're one of us now. The glass cracked, The prison shook, the walls screamed, and then there was nothing but darkness. The darkness swallowed me whole. I couldn't move. My limbs felt heavy, like the weight of the prison had crushed me, pushing me down into the cold, suffocating earth. My breath was ragged, my heart racing, but everything was still. The prison had consumed my every thought, every step. It had taken me, just like it had taken everyone else. The whispers, the shadows, the figures, they were all part of it now. Part of the walls. Part of the curse. I stood there, frozen in place, as the weight of the truth sank in. The prison wasn't just haunted, it was alive. And I had been foolish enough to think that the rules would protect me, that I could survive. But now I was part of it. The mirror flashed before my eyes, again the reflection of Gideon Harker. His hollow eyes locked onto mine. "You're one of us now." His voice echoed in my mind, filling every corner of the prison. The voices began to rise, and I realized they weren't just whispers anymore. They were screams, the voices of the lost caretakers, the souls trapped within the prison's walls. They were all calling to me, pulling me deeper into their twisted world. But then, something shifted. In the distance, I heard a sound, a low, distant rumble. The ground beneath me trembled slightly, as if the prison itself was shifting, waking from its slumber. The storm outside intensified, rattling the walls, the windows, and shaking the very foundation of the building. And in the midst of the chaos, something inside me snapped. I remembered the rules, the ones that the warden had told me. They'll keep you safe. I had broken them all. I had ignored the warnings, disobeyed the instructions, and now the prison was coming for me, just like it had come for everyone else. But there was one last rule I hadn't broken. The one rule that had always kept me safe: never look in the mirror. I had done it, and it had already cost me. But could I fix it? Could I undo the damage? The ground shook harder, and I saw it, the exit. The heavy steel doors at the end of the hallway. The one thing I had been running towards since the beginning. The one thing I had never dared to open. I knew it was my chance to escape. I could feel it. Deep inside, this was my only chance to get out. But I didn't know if I could make it. The whispers became louder, and the shadows seemed to shift around me. The walls groaned as if the entire prison was coming alive, trying to hold me in, pulling me back into the abyss. But I didn't care. I had to leave. I pushed my way down the hallway, every step feeling like I was wading through thick, suffocating air. The prison resisted me, its walls pressing in, its floors creaking underfoot. The figures, the spirits of the lost caretakers, were everywhere now. They followed me, their eyes glowing with empty malice. Their whispers were deafening, 100 voices calling to me, telling me I couldn't escape, that I was theirs. But I wasn't going to let them have me. I reached the door, and I didn't hesitate. I grabbed the handle and turned it. The door didn't budge. It was locked, just like it had been the night before. But this time, there was no turning back. I had to escape. I pulled at the door with all my strength, feeling the darkness pressing against me. The whispers, the shadows, everything was closing in. I could feel the presence of the prison tightening around me, its malevolent will determined to keep me inside. But as I pulled, something inside me broke. I pushed harder. The door creaked, the metal groaning in protest. The prison was fighting back, but I wouldn't let it win. I had broken the rules, yes. I had let the spirits in, let the prison claim. Me, but I wasn't going to die here. Not like the others. Not like Gideon Harker. With one final, desperate tug, the door gave way, swinging open with a loud, deafening sound. The air rushed out, fresh and cool, and for the first time in what felt like forever, I could breathe. I stepped out of the prison, into the storm, into the night. But the moment I crossed the threshold, I felt the prison's grip release me, like it was letting me go. But not for long. As I ran down the path that led from the prison, the wind howled behind me, and I could swear I heard the whispers following me, fading slowly as the distance grew. You're one of us. They faded with every step I took, until they were just an echo in my mind. I reached the road, and the lights from the distant town shone in the distance, warm and welcoming, but I didn't look back. I couldn't. I had to keep moving, keep running, until I was out of the woods, away from the prison. I didn't know what would happen now. I didn't know if the prison would let me go for good, but I knew one thing. For sure, I had made it out. I had escaped. I had broken the curse, or had I? As I walked further from the prison, I felt the faintest tug at the back of my mind, like a whisper I couldn't quite hear. I turned my head, but the road behind me was empty. The prison was gone. At least, that's what I told myself.